Good evening, Professor Chia.
Hi,
I have a question here. I'm thinking that, do you think language is also very important incorporating into a religious organization in Singapore, language? For example, many young people who done very well who score good grades for the English language, but they find it difficult to gel in with the Mahayana temple in Singapore, which are mainly Chinese medium.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mike. Hi, Mike. Hi, Mike. So address you as Leo or Mike?
Leo.
Leo, oh, sorry. Hi, Leo. Thanks very much for your question. Yeah, I think you have raised a very important point about language as being a very important, play a very important role in promoting, the Dharma. And this is something that also is that Buddhist organizations need to consider in the Singapore context. And I think you're absolutely right. Especially after from the 1980s onwards, where how English became the official language of instruction in our in schools in Singapore, and how Singaporeans, in fact, as you rightly pointed out, are becoming Anglophone, English-speaking Singaporeans, and how with the Speak Mandarin campaign, there's this decline of dialects, and of course Singaporeans only speak Mandarin, but very often not very well. That it actually becomes important area of concern for Mahayana Buddhist organization that are too Chinese language based, because they are not able to reach to a younger generation of Buddhists. So because many younger generation of Singaporeans are more Anglophone, they prefer to communicate in English, and they read and they use social media and all this in English as well. So Buddhist organizations need to engage them in English, and this is what some of the more successful, I would say, Chinese Mahayana organizations are actively doing in order to engage to the younger generation of Singaporeans. So they are using English as the main language in their kind of Dharma activities. But unfortunately, because of that, some of the older and more conservative Chinese Mahayana temples in Singapore are not able to keep up to time. So in fact, there's also a very interesting trend in Singapore these days that many younger generation of Singaporean Buddhists are turning to Theravada and also Vajrayana Buddhist organizations, because they are more English-based, and many of these organizations appeal to a much more, I would say, Anglophone middle-class Singaporean society. So we see this very interesting shift as well. So of course, if we look at the context of the Humanistic Buddhist organization that I share, the Humanistic Buddhist organizations in Singapore tend to be the more progressive and the more, I would say, they are able to change very quickly in a way to meet the needs of the Singaporean community. So in fact, many of the organizations that I point out, including Maha Prajna, Foguang and Siji, they are using English, they are conducting activities in English in order to attract a wider and younger audience. So this is something very interesting that I hope the Chinese Mahayana temples really need to consider how to make their activities more appealing and more relevant to the younger generation of Singaporeans. Thanks very much for your questions. Thank you.
I think we have one question from the chat box by Fu Ye Ming. Could you please share more about the connection between the Maha Bodhi School in Singapore and Bodhi Institute in Penang?
Yeah. Thank you. That's a really interesting question about the connection. So there are connections in a number of ways, in the sense that this is kind of a transnational kind of early, or I should put it, there are early connections and the recent kind of connections. But early connections, of course, they are connected because of this human life Buddhism or humanistic Buddhist networks, where they are overlap of different prominent teachers. And of course, if you're familiar with Bodhi School, initially the idea was having Fa Fang Fa Shi, who is a prominent disciple of Master Tai Shi, to become the spiritual advisor. So when Fa Fang Fa Shi passed through Penang to go to Sri Lanka, he was actually invited to be an advisor. And he actually passed away, unfortunately, before he could do that. And that was how Venerable Jumo was being nominated to be the advisor. And that was how he came to Penang. and later on became a very important teacher of Buddhism in Malaysia. So all these are part of this network. And similarly, the Maha Bodhi School in Singapore, I would say, is part of this broader connection and networks. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, Master Chi Hang was again a disciple of Master Tai Chi, and how they actually had this kind of vision to promote Buddhist education through the schools, and how the Maha Bodhi School in Singapore was established as one of, for the kind of in this kind of networks to propagate the Dharma. And another very prominent, subsequently, there are very prominent lay Buddhists that were involved in this network. And I think one of them was Bi Jin Hui, if I remember correctly. She was one of the very prominent Buddhist lay Buddhist leader that actually connected the Bodhi school in Singapore and Malaysia. But of course, even till today, there are a lot of very vibrant, I would say, kind of collaboration and connection between the two schools today. And of course, this has a lot to do with the kind of legacy of, I would say, human life / humanistic Buddhism that connected the Buddhist school, and how Buddhist education remains a very important part of this narrative.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Is there any other question? We have one more question from the phone.
Yeah.
Herman
here from Singapore for Guangsan. Hi, Dr. Jack Chia. Thank you for your comprehensive coverage of the Humanistic Buddhism in Singapore. Just backtrack to the first question by Mike Liu regarding the using of English medium as instruction in propagating Mahayana Buddhism. Yes, in fact, we did actually envisage that challenge many years back. So actually, before the pandemic, for Guangsan Singapore, actually, for 2 years in a row, we have actually invited English-speaking venerables from Guangsan, from all over the world, as we have many branches, all over the world. We invited all these English-speaking venerables to Guangsan, Singapore, every month, every month, to conduct Dharma talks in English. So right, even now, today, we also have English Dharma classes conducted in English. I myself is facilitating Dharma reading classes, every Tuesday online. So just Mike Liu, you are in Singapore, right? Welcome to visit Guangsan, Singapore.
Actually, I prefer Singapore Buddhist mission because of language.
Okay. Okay. Of course, the Dharma services are still conducted in Mandarin, traditionally.
My son studied overseas. He can't speak very good Chinese. So that's partially why I sent him to Singapore Buddhist missions. They have he like to play electronic guitar, and SBN have this facility for him.
I see.
Okay.
I have a friend, brother Ziming, who's active. I think probably band member as well.
Oh yeah, I know him.
Yeah, it's a small community. But thanks so much, Brother Herman, for sharing. And of course, I think Guangsan is one of the very active and I would say successful organizations in Singapore that's really promoting Mahayana Buddhism in English language. And I think one of the also reasons that why Guangsan Singapore is so successful in doing that is because of the because Guangsan earlier on had already established branches, in fact, in North America and Europe, and Guangsan has translated many Buddhist books and also Dharma curriculum into English. And I think one of the most prominent branches is actually Silai Temple. They have been playing an active role in propagating Dharma in North America. So I think this is also, one of the reasons why Guangsan is able to promote Mahayana Buddhism so successfully, because they already have a lot of ready materials from the US and from Europe. But I think a lot of the more local, Mahayana temples in Singapore, I would say, lack the expertise. They don't have the kind of resources, and this is something that I think the local temples need to really consider how they can better reach out to the English-speaking community, the English-speaking Buddhists in Singapore. So this is something also interesting to think about.
We have one question by Ming Kwan. Ming Kwan, would you like to turn on your mic and ask? You have a long question. Ming Kwan? Or if not, then I just read out the question. Ming?
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to take this opportunity to ask a question. At about the same time, there were also monks and lay Buddhist leaders in Malaysia who were involved in social welfare and relief. What was the difference between them and Ci Hang, Yan Pei in terms of their original intentions? Why did they both use social activities as a way to promote Buddhism? This is the question by Ming Kwan.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question, Ming Kwan. I would say that to answer your first question, so you have two questions. The first question is how are they different from the Malaysian community? I would say that they were actually not very different. In fact, they were also very much part of the same network, as I briefly mentioned earlier, that how Venerable Jumo was also a disciple of a student of Master Tai Shi. So when he came to Malaysia to propagate the Dharma, he had very similar vision as what Venerable Master Ci Hang and Venerable Yan Pei, that is to actually promote the kind of Buddhism that's relevant to this worldly life, and of course this idea of human life Buddhism. And of course for Venerable Yan Pei, he promoted his idea of Humanistic Buddhism, I would say, was closer to what Master Yingxuan's idea, but I would say that there are a lot more similarities in terms of their activities, while the differences come mainly from the kind of more doctrinal interpretation of what Humanistic Buddhism entails. So this is actually occur at a more higher kind of doctrinal level in terms of difference, but in terms of more practical kind of activities, I would say there are more similarities than differences in terms of the Dharma activities, like including establishing auditoriums for public Dharma lectures, as well as Buddhist welfare activities. So they are pretty similar, I would say, in terms of the kind of things they offer. The second question about why did they use social activities as a way to promote Buddhism, I think this is a really good question. And this is in fact one of the very important aspects of human life or humanistic Buddhism. And that is one of the ways that what Master Tai Shi and Master Yingxuan came out with, is that how to make Buddhism this worthy and contribute to society, how social activities can be used as a platform to propagate the Dharma. And of course, in order to do that, they need to be able to, in a way, to make Buddhism relevant to this worldly life. So Buddhists are encouraged to be volunteers to contribute to charity, but by contributing to charity, this is not just like, in a more traditional kind of Buddhist context. Doing charity is more for merit making, for more like the ji gong de. This is a more traditional kind of understanding. But for humanistic kind of Buddhist understanding of doing social activities to promote Buddhism, this is actually the way, in a way, on the one hand, it's a kind of a self-cultivation, in the sense that how by practicing the Dharma, this worldly life, is to practice it and to contribute to society and help others. So this is what, in the kind of humanistic Buddhist context, they call it they will say that it is 实践 人间佛教. So they believe that actively doing that is a practical way of practicing it. And then on the other hand, it's very interesting that how as I mentioned also earlier, that how humanistic Buddhism, they are promoting humanistic Buddhism. They see the importance of propagating the Dharma. But one of the ways they propagate the Dharma, of course, is through Dharma activities such as Dharma talks or kind of Dharma classes. But another way of propagating the Dharma that many of the Buddhists use was actually through social activities, because this is one of the ways to reach out to the general public. to share the Dharma with others. And of course, doing charitable work is one of the ways that they think is important to do that, because by helping the poor and the needy at the same time, you're not only practicing the Dharma, but you're also sharing the Dharma with them when they conduct such activities. So this is also another reason why they place a lot of emphasis on social activities as a way to practice humanistic Buddhism. So thanks very much for your question.
We have another question from Leo. He asked, in 2020, 20% of local population is free thinkers. Many of them make up age below 40 years old, 2% more than the Christian population. In your personal views, what more Singapore Buddhists can organize to attract free thinkers?
That's an excellent question, and that's a question that many Buddhist friends they're asking me. How can they make Buddhism more appealing to the younger generation for both Buddhists and also free thinker or so-called non-Buddhists, or those that are called not Buddhists but practice more of the Bai Chinese worship? So how to make Buddhism more appealing? And in fact, as you rightly pointed out, that how in Singapore there's a this rise of evangelical Christianity with the emergence of mega churches. Many younger generations of Buddhists are going to mega churches and attending church activities. So how can Buddhists become more appealing? How can Buddhist organizations offer more appealing activities? And my answer is always which is learn from the mega churches. Take a look at what are the successful activities they are organizing, what they are doing. And of course, I think Buddhists should learn from the successful model and how their successful way of management, the successful way of introducing appealing activities to the younger generation, and how Buddhists can learn from that. And in fact, this is what Master Tai Chi learned, in his earlier days. He's actually learned from the Christians as well during his European tour, where he visited the YMCA and other, Christian churches. That's where he realized that how human life Buddhism, and how learning from the Christians, missionaries at that time, helped him to formulate his idea of human life Buddhism. And of course, again, for Venerable Zhen Ye, she came out with this idea of the Tzu Chi Charitable Foundation, was actually from observing the Catholic nuns, the Catholic churches in Taiwan, and how she came up with this idea about having a Buddhist charitable foundation. So I think in the Singapore context, I think Buddhists should learn from the successful Singaporean mega churches and think about how they can make their activities more appealing to the younger generations. And I think this is the way to go.
We have another futuristic question from Ma Ying. Based on your research on the history of humanistic Buddhism in Singapore, do you have any suggestions for the developments of humanistic Buddhism for the future?
That's an excellent question. Thanks so much, Mahayana. I must confess that I'm a historian, so I cannot predict the future. I study the past. But of course, I'm happy to share with you what are some suggestions that what humanistic Buddhist organizations to consider in future. Of course, first, and as I will just share with Mike Liu, that how Buddhist organizations should learn from the successful examples of the Christian mega churches, how the successful management model and how their new, have attractive activities for the younger generations, and how Buddhist organizations can learn from the activities and make Buddhist activities more appealing to the younger generation. So I think this is something that Buddhist organizations should think about and never afraid to learn from successful examples. I think this is one of the ways to move forward. And I think the second way, of course, for humanistic Buddhist development in future, of course, has a lot to do with education and research. And of course, one of the very important things that that several Buddhist organizations have been doing is actually to support university efforts in terms of research and education, and especially for instance, for Fu Kuang San has supported the Chinese University of Hong Kong's Humanistic Buddhism Center, and of course now we have the University of Malaysia, a Humanistic Buddhism Research Center. And I think this is one of the ways that how humanistic Buddhist organizations should engage with the institute, the university, institutes of higher learning, the universities to to conduct research and promote education on humanistic Buddhism. So this is, again, humanistic Buddhism should not be only confined to the monasteries or the temples, but it should reach out, and in this case, to the university and to secular institutions to make Buddhism relevant to contemporary society. I think this is another direction that I hope humanistic Buddhist organizations can consider, and something that that I'm very happy to work together, with. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we have another question from KT Sweet. Dr. Jack, there are many informations talking about Venerable Tsukmo's contribution in Malaysia, but there are less informations of his contribution in Singapore. So I want to know more about it. And any recommendations of books of Venerable Tsukmo since he was the student of Tai Chi?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I answer the second part of the question about recommendation of books. You should read Venerable Tsukmo's collected works, 传香化世全集. This is the entire 27 or 28 volume work. It's a huge volume that you should be able to find. So this collected volume includes everything about Venerable Tsukmo's life and times, and also include his Dharma teachings, his artistic work, his poems and writings. And of course, if you want to learn more about Venerable Tsukmo, you should definitely visit his temple, Sanhui Jiangtang, the Triple Wisdom Hall in Penang, and you should talk to his learn more from his disciples, Venerable Jichen and Venerable from Venerable Jichen and Venerable Jichuan, who is now running the Triple Wisdom Hall. So I think this is some of the resources and places that you should visit to learn more about Venerable Tsukmo. How about his contributions to Singapore? That's an interesting question. Venerable Tsukmo also propagated the Dharma in Singapore. He actually has a small organization, if I remember correctly. I think Wan Fo Ling, if I remember correctly. That he has a kind of a small following, but of course, one of his prominent disciples, Ji Guang Fa Si, spent time in Singapore, and he has been actively promoting the Dharma. I remember at the Dazhong Fo Xue Hui, if I remember correctly. So he does have some students, and he has an organization and some students in Singapore. But I would say that he was definitely more prominent in Malaysia, and especially in Penang, where that is really the base of his followers. Yeah, thanks for your question.
Okay, another question from Fu Yetning.
Yeah.
Is the Green Heaven open to non-Buddhists? Is there any Buddhist elements in the rehabilitation programs in Green Heaven? The second question is, how is the impact towards the developments of humanistic Buddhism under the policy of Singapore government?
Great. Those are great questions. First is whether is Green Haven open to non-Buddhists? Yes, it's open to non-Buddhists. In fact, all the Buddhist charitable organizations, and in fact, not only Buddhists, all the religious charitable organizations in Singapore are usually open to all, regardless of race and religion in Singapore. And this is something that I would say one of the very important driving principles of Singapore charity and welfare is actually to support, and offer services to everyone. So this is the Green Haven is also open to non-Buddhists, and there's the Dharma element. There's Dharma classes and teachings in Green Haven, but it's optional in the sense that for Buddhists, they can of course attend the activities, but if they are non-Buddhists, they can also opt out of the religion. So in a way, these religious services in a way allows various Singaporeans from different race and religion to get the kind of support of rehabilitation support at Green Haven. But of course, one of the difference between Green Haven and other halfway houses is that it does have a Buddhist support network element to help with a more of a spiritual aspect of the rehabilitation. The second question is about the impact of development of humanistic Buddhism under Singapore policy. I would say that in Singapore context, Humanistic Buddhist organizations are very supportive of the government initiative, and in fact they work very closely with government agencies to promote not only social welfare activities that's with the often in Singapore with the Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth, as well as the Ministry of Social and Family. These are the two main agencies that Buddhist organizations work very closely with. But of course, the humanistic Buddhist organizations also try to contribute to different aspects of Buddhist of Singapore's government policy, especially with regards to the religious harmony, which is one of the very important policy in Singapore. And of course, very often humanistic Buddhist organizations also organize kind of interfaith activities and dialogue to encourage Singaporeans from other race and religion to learn more about what Buddhists do in order to have better, common mutual understanding and communication. And this helps to make Singapore a more cohesive society. So this is also something that humanistic Buddhist organizations are actively doing in Singapore. But thanks very much for that.
Okay, I guess it's anyone has any other question? If not, as a moderator, I would like to ask the last question before we end the lecture today. Besides the role of clerics, I wonder, are there any lay Buddhist individuals or organizations have played similar role in promoting humanistic Buddhism in Singapore?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. Of course, in terms of lay organization, one of the very first to be established was the Chinese Buddhist Association by Ning Dayu in 1927. So, of course, lay Buddhists play important roles in supporting humanistic Buddhist organizations. Of course, one of the most pragmatic aspects, of course, is the financial support that many of them contributed to the establishment and especially the funding of this humanistic Buddhist organization. And of course, other than that, many lay Buddhists play an important role in terms of promoting the Dharma through helping with the volunteer to be the kind of Dharma class teachers, because of course, as I mentioned earlier, there are not many monastics in Singapore that are able to carry out all the activities. So lay Buddhists play an important role in teaching some of the Dharma classes, leading some of the activities, and of course, they play a very important role in supporting, including fundraising, social philanthropic activities, and many others. So they're just as important, I would say, in terms of contributing to the Buddhist community. So you asked a very good question about who are some of them. For instance, I think Brother Herman, who just asked me a question, I would say he's one of those very active, lay Buddhists who are contributing to promoting humanistic Buddhism in Singapore.
Thank you, Jack Chia, for the very comprehensive, actually, it's not a brief history, very comprehensive histories of humanistic Buddhism in Singapore. And thank you everyone for participating.